Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. China has a habit of not mincing words, and when it carried out the 2-day-long punishment military drills called the Joint Sword 2024A, Beijing yet again made no bones of what it intended to do: to cut off the autonomously governed island's blood vessels by simulating attacks on Taiwan's ports and airports. A total of 111 Chinese aircraft took part in the drills, along with dozens of warships and submarines. At a time when the United States of America is caught up in the bruising wars in Ukraine and the Palestinian territory of the Gaza Strip, many military analysts say that China is sensing its opportunity. There's a steady but a certain shift that is happening in the balance of power in the Pacific. For years, military strategists have prepared for the worst-case scenario of when China would invade Taiwan. And what the punishment military drills of China, which were meant to send a message to the new President Lai Ching-te in Taipei, have indicated is that China may be closer than ever before. For mock military drills with live ammunition are just one step away from an all-out military invasion. And our next report gets you more details. This infographic, released by the Chinese state media, must leave no one in any doubt. China would surround Taiwan with its warships and fighter jets and would isolate it from the rest of the world. And from there on, the Chinese can strike pretty much any inch of the Taiwanese territory, from land, air and sea. The animation might be simplistic, but it wipes away all doubts that anyone might have had of the Chinese intentions. This is the all-out war that China has been preparing for decades. To surround Taiwan and to overwhelm its defenses in a final battle for its reunification with the mainland. So as the Chinese military drills began at 7:45 a.m. local time, there was immediate panic over the Taiwanese skies. Taipei immediately scrambled its F-16 fighter jets. The Taiwanese radars were on high alert as wave after wave of Chinese fighter jets breached the median line and resorted to some threatening maneuvers. The Chinese punishment drills involved the mock bombing of foreign vessels in the Taiwan Strait. Detailed maps indicating how the Chinese warships would move in to destroy the Taiwanese defense infrastructure were also put out. The Chinese Air Force would overwhelm the first chain of islands to prevent any allied nation in the region to jump to Taiwan's defense.
As a new productive combat force of the army, our rocket artillery units are able to strike from a distance accurately and fiercely. We are able to achieve firepower precision strikes on combat targets anywhere and at any time. As long as the Party Central Committee, the Central Military Commission and President Xi give an order, we will be ready to fight anytime and resolutely eliminate all Taiwan independent separatist forces.
Despite the clear military pressure, the Taiwanese leadership has struck a defiant tone. From the time the modern communist Chinese nation came into existence in 1949, China has never really controlled Taiwan. And the Taiwanese Foreign Minister, Lin Chia-lung, insists that Taipei would not give up its autonomy just because Beijing wants it to.
We will not make any concessions because of this Chinese military exercise, because it concerns the development of democracy in Taiwan. The inauguration ceremony of the Taiwan government, which was elected by the people, is a happy event. And the fact that Taiwan is a democratic country will not be changed just because Communist China declares that Taiwan is a part of China.
On the Kinmen Islands, which would be one of the first to come under attack in case of hostilities breaking out, there is a certain sense of unease. People are trying to go about their lives as normal, and yet in the back of their minds, the Taiwanese people are aware of how quickly things can escalate. Realistically speaking, the Taiwanese are simply no match in a military contest with Beijing. For Taiwan to survive a military onslaught by the Chinese, it would require the active involvement of the United States of America. The American policy on Taiwan is of strategic ambiguity, but it also depends on who is in charge at the White House. Joe Biden has repeatedly vowed to defend Taiwan militarily in case of Chinese aggression.
Thank you.
But if there is a change of guard at the White House in November later this year, it would be difficult to predict if Washington would spring to Taiwan's defense in case the Chinese unification war breaks out. For the first time ever, Russia is conducting military drills that involve tactical nuclear weapons using the Kinzhal and the Iskander missiles. These military drills are taking place in the southern military district of Russia, which includes Crimea and the 4 Ukrainian regions that have been annexed by Moscow in the war so far. The drills were first announced on the 6th of May and reportedly are a response to the increasingly willing nations such as the United Kingdom and now the United States to allow Ukraine to use Western long-range missiles to strike targets deep inside the Russian territory. Russia's nuclear doctrine is clear. Moscow can resort to the nuclear option if it feels that its sovereignty is under threat or if it suffers massive losses on the battlefield. But what really are tactical nuclear weapons, and how close is Russia to the threshold of pulling the nuclear trigger? Our next report gets you more details. This is the first time ever that Russia is publicly conducting tactical nuclear weapons drills after announcing it to the rest of the world. Tactical nuclear weapons come in many varieties. They can be in the form of air bombs, short-range ballistic missiles, or can even be fitted as small artillery ammunitions. In the videos shared by the Russian Defense Ministry, Russia's tactical nuclear warheads are seen fitted on Moscow's much-famed hypersonic missiles such as the Iskander and the Kinzhal missiles. All nuclear powers carry out regular strategic nuclear drills. But this is the first time that Russia has publicly resorted to practical training of non-strategic nuclear weapons.
Unlike nuclear-tipped intercontinental ballistic missiles, which can destroy entire cities, tactical nuclear weapons are less powerful. They have a yield of around 1 kiloton. In comparison, the American bomb dropped on Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. These weapons can be very small and therefore discreetly carried in a truck or plane. They're designed to be used against troops on the battlefield. Tactical nuclear weapons have never been used in combat. They're also not regulated by international arms control agreements.
From the outset of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Kremlin had repeatedly resorted to strident nuclear rhetoric. But what has begun happening this week is different. The high-pitched defense strategies that have been sounded in the West, such as the French President Emmanuel Macron insisting that he would not rule out sending French troops to Ukraine, and the United Kingdom, and now increasingly the United States, making noises that Ukraine should be allowed to use long-range missiles to strike targets deep inside the territory of Russia, has changed the intensity of the war. In the last fortnight, Russia has reopened the Kharkiv front, pushing back the Ukrainian defense forces for almost about 5 to 10 kilometers in certain areas. Russian drones and missiles, launched from the ground and air, have devastated the villages along the Kharkiv front lines, while the Ukrainians are making a desperate scramble to get air defense systems from the West.
It's the shortage of air defense systems that are actually available in the world. It's the lack of long-range capabilities for our warriors and the complete inability to destroy the very source of Russian terror near our borders, including the missile launchers that actually hit Ukraine.
The war in Ukraine has changed dramatically from the time that it had started 2 years ago. Russia's nuclear rhetoric has been matched by the Western nations' reluctance to negotiate. Peace and security will not return to Eastern Europe so long as the NATO military alliance insists on having deadly missiles stationed in Eastern Europe pointed in the direction of Russia. And with each passing day on the battlefield, what is clear is that the West and Russia are hurtling ever closer towards a nuclear Armageddon. At least 7 people, including 2 police officers, have been killed and hundreds of others wounded in more than a week of violence sparked by the controversial voting reforms in France's Pacific territory of New Caledonia. The French government has sent in thousands of extra police forces over the past week to help restore calm. The French President Emmanuel Macron, on a day-long visit to the archipelago on Thursday, declared a pause in the reform and also conceded that more talks are needed. Additionally, France is accusing Azerbaijan of interference and of being behind the protests and violence after Azerbaijani flags were seen alongside the Kanak symbols in the protests. So what really is happening in New Caledonia? Our next report gets you more details.
New Caledonia, home to some 270,000 people, is one of several French overseas territories left over from colonial times. The restive archipelago, which lies between Australia and Fiji, has been a French territory since 1853. In the worst unrest since 1980s, the French territory has been rocked by days of deadly rioting over constitutional reforms bitterly opposed by the indigenous population. Kanaks, who have led the protests, constitute 41% of the population. Currently, voting in the territory is restricted to indigenous Kanaks and those who have arrived from France before 1998. Since 1998, more than 40,000 French citizens have moved to New Caledonia. The planned reform would enable more French residents to vote, including any who have been in New Caledonia for at least 10 years. Kanaks are worried that their political power would be diluted and any future independence referendum harder to achieve.
We have been lied to for years and years. They have lied to our ancestors. They have lied to our elders through the various arrangements that have been made. We are on our 3rd agreement and it is the longest. We are tired of not being recognized.
In a hastily arranged visit on Thursday, French President Emmanuel Macron landed in New Caledonia's capital, Nouméa, seeking an end to more than a week of looting, arson and deadly clashes. He stopped short of withdrawing the voting reforms altogether, but promised to use the following weeks to try and reach an overall political deal regarding the island territory's future.
Je me suis engagé à ce que cette réforme
I made a commitment for this reform not to be implemented by force in the current context, and that we would give ourselves a few weeks to be able to allow for a return to calm, the resumption of dialogue, with a vision towards a general agreement. This should follow the following steps. The first is, as part of this commitment, I ask all the leaders explicitly to call for the lifting of barricades. Once the lifting of the barricades is in effect and clearly observed, the state of emergency will be lifted. Third, political dialogue should resume immediately.
Le dialogue politique doit reprendre immédiatement.
France has a sizable Armenian diaspora of nearly 650,000 people and has sided with Armenia in its conflict with Azerbaijan over the disputed breakaway in Nagorno-Karabakh region. Consequently, tensions have simmered between Paris and Baku, with Baku critical of French colonialism in overseas territories. At a time when Paris is struggling to quell the protests, some 17,000 kilometers away, a diplomatic spat with Baku is likely to complicate the situation even further.
Since grabbing power in a coup in February 2021, the Myanmar junta has been fighting an ever-widening civil war against the ethnic armed groups and the pro-democracy protesters across Myanmar. Now, struggling to crush the widespread opposition, the embattled junta, despite dissent, is pressing ahead with military conscription that now includes the young Rohingyas. In the western Rakhine state, an ethnic armed group, the Arakan Army, claims to have taken control of all junta military bases around Butidong as well as the town itself. But in a disturbing turn of events, the Arakan Army soldiers have resorted to widespread arson and looting of Rohingya homes in Butidong. As many as about 200,000 Rohingya have had to flee from their homes to escape the fires, besides an unconfirmed number of people who were also killed in this violence. So what is happening in the civil war in Myanmar? Our next pawn gets more details.
The Rohingyas in the southeast nation of Myanmar have long suffered mass atrocities and forced displacement perpetrated by the Myanmar military. Many, including UN experts, consider the horrendous atrocities to be genocide against the Muslim majority community.
An estimated 45,000 Rohingya have reportedly fled to an area on the Naf River near the border with Bangladesh, seeking protection.
Now they are trapped on the front lines of Myanmar's civil war. In the western Rakhine state, the Arakan army, a powerful ethnic armed group battling Myanmar's junta, has seized a predominantly Rohingya town close to the Bangladesh border. A weekend of widespread arson attacks and looting by the Arakan army soldiers has resulted in the displacement of nearly 200,000 people. Reportedly, at 9:30 p.m. local time on May 17th, the Arakan army soldiers entered the Butidong town and shortly after began torching homes. Additionally, phones were confiscated and threats issued to kill anyone trying to contact any family abroad. Junta airstrikes and artillery had also hit Butidong that day. Given the junta imposed internet and telecoms blackout, it is difficult to verify precisely what is unfolding. The Arakan army has denied torching the town and instead blamed the Myanmar military, along with allied Rohingya militant groups, which it refers to as Bengali terrorists, of destroying Butidong. The violence echoes ruthless attacks on the stateless Rohingya community in 2016 and 2017. When the Myanmar's military had launched a brutal campaign of killing, rape and arson. The vicious campaign is currently subject to a genocide investigation at the International Court of Justice. Hundreds of thousands fled the military's clearance operations, making perilous boat journeys, choosing to risk their lives at sea over enduring inhumane conditions at home. An estimated 1 million Rohingya people now live in what is widely believed to be the world's largest refugee camp in Bangladesh. In the sprawling Bangladesh camps also, there isn't much respite for them given the escalating gang violence, besides the struggle for food, clean water and hygienic conditions.
The ration is not enough for us. We can't work outside the camp either if we want to earn more, since the police will arrest us if we go outside. The conditions inside the camps are also not safe. There is no security both inside and outside the camp for us. If I had enough money, I would have gone with my family to Indonesia or Malaysia by now.
Many who stayed back in Myanmar endure apartheid-like conditions and face severe restrictions on their movement, education and healthcare. More than 100,000 Rohingya people have been kept in squalid displacement camps by the military and the government in the Rakhine state capital for the past decade. Given the worsening human rights emergency in Myanmar, experts are of the opinion that Rohingyas are again at risk of genocide. The burgeoning humanitarian crisis due to violence in the Rakhine state has sparked a flurry of condemnations from the international community and human rights groups. But will it be enough to ensure that these crimes are not repeated?
At least 40 people were killed and many others were wounded by gunmen on motorbikes in an attack on a mining village in central Nigeria on the 20th of May. This is the latest violent episode to have hit the region that is deeply troubled by resource disputes and intercommunal strife. The late Monday attack took place in the Plateau state, where clashes between the nomadic herders and the pastoral farmers are rife. Also, last December, nearly 200 people had been killed in Plateau's Bokos and Barkin Ladi districts over several days of violence during the Christmas period. Our next report gets more details from Nigeria.
Central Nigeria is an ethnically and religiously diverse hinterland known as the Middle Belt, where the vicious cycle of violence has claimed thousands of lives in almost 2 decades. The latest attack took place late Monday evening when armed men riding on motorbikes invaded the Zurak mining community in Wase district in the Plateau state. shooting indiscriminately at residents, abducting an unspecified number of people, and setting houses ablaze. Our correspondent Luisa Olani has sent us this ground report in the immediate aftermath of the incident.
Residents of Zurak village in Bashel district of Wase local government area of Plateau State, Nigeria were thrown into mourning on Monday evening as suspected bandits invaded their community and reported to have killed about 40 people, injuring scores and burning several houses. However, the State Commissioner of Information, Musa Ashom, said only 9 deaths have been confirmed so far. Various media reports say residents camped for safety as these gunmen in their numbers raided the community with sophisticated weapons, disrupting the day's activities. Now, Plateau State, Nigeria has been fraught with a series of armed attacks in recent times, with thousands of persons killed in recurrent violence in the state since 1994.
According to the police, the armed men, referred locally as bandits, were fleeing an aggressive onslaught by security forces against bandits who were using the Bangalala forest as a hideout. While at least 7 assailants were neutralized by the security forces, the fleeing gang members had caused the mayhem in Zurak and the village of Dakai. The Zurak community is predominantly Muslim and lives off the mines, while Wase district has deposits of zinc and lead. The Plateau state as a whole is renowned for tin mining. Clashes between nomadic herders and pastoral farmers are fairly common in the region. Rising population and climate change has contributed to escalating tensions over grazing land, access to water, and the state's metal reserves. Parts of northern and central Nigeria are also terrorized by heavily armed gangs who target villagers, schools, and travelers, carrying out mass kidnappings for ransom. The most populous African nation is plagued with security challenges on multiple fronts, including a 14-year-long Islamist insurgency in its northeast, separatist violence in the southeast, and frequently deadly clashes between farmers and herders in the central region. The challenge of this multiple-front war is daunting. How prepared is the Nigerian government to deal with this challenge? Only time will tell.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.